Hi guys, welcome to Monocure3D Protips. Today we're going to check out this beast. It's the Anycubic Mono X. We've got so much to get through, we better start right now. So I've got the lid out first and we can show it to you. There you go, that's the actual printer itself and all the accessories in the top. You can see there, it's very well packed actually. I'm very impressed with the way they've done that. You know, sitting nicely inside the lid, keeps it all well contained. So first thing I see here is the build plate. Nice, large, very similar to the other two printers in regards to size. Protective film, a metal scraper, they're always handy. Paper filters, we always use these. And the mask, there's the power cable, Australian power cable. This will be the AC adapter. Okay, that's interesting. So the AC power adapter is on the outside, an external one opposed to an internal one. This is a delicate and an important part of the printer. The vat where the resin goes, a very important resin, they put it in a plastic bag. That to me makes a lot of sense. And you'll see here as well, which is interesting, and in English too, a line that says max, but obviously maximum height for the resin. And now look in here, there's one more little pack in here. We have all the bits and pieces, the plastic scraper again that goes in the vat, a USB stick, and this here looks to me like a little Wi-Fi aerial. But that to me says that this now has Wi-Fi connectivity. The standard QC card from Anycubic, always nice to see that one. Means it's been checked and it's passed QC. The after sale service card, your standard Allen key, and some gloves, always handy. So these are the screws to hold down the vat. Interesting, like they're separate and they come out. There's nothing else in there, so I'm going to take that off and we're going to reveal the beast. The shape of it and the dimensions of it remind me a lot more of the Elegoo Satin than the E-Pax E10, and the reason being it's got this much lower profile here. The E10 E-Pax is probably nearly double the height there. Standard screen and screen protector. I really like what they've done here actually, first impressions. I think that's a really nice touch. Standard on and off switch here. There's your port for your power. And then just on this side here, you've got your ROHS certification and barcodes and all that sort of stuff. The bottom of it looks like they've got two cooling fans for the LED array, which is always good to have extra. Again, that's finished nicely. They've got these rubber feet. Oh, one is missing. Now maybe that's what I saw in my plastic. Ah, here it is. So there you go. Check your packaging for anything like that could have fallen out while it was in transport. The screens has a polarizer obviously underneath that, and if you get any resin on it, it's very hard to get it off, and some guys have been using TUFF sheets to protect it, but be very, very wary. Let's have a quick look at the lid. Apparently these are prone to cracking, and I've heard people who have taken these out of the box and have cracked, but they don't do too well apparently with resin fumes, and they do create those little spider cracks in them. I think Anycubic have recognised it and they are going to be rectifying it. But just on a side note, this is one of the first ones I've seen which has had this very nice protective film over the whole thing. The standard manual, which is always good from Anycubic, they always put a lot into their manuals, and their translation in English is all pretty good in these and pretty easy to understand. A lot of pictures, a lot of guides there to help you navigate through setting this up. The build volume is 192 by 120 by 245 millimeters. Layer height of 10 plus microns. XY resolution 50 microns. 384 by 2400 pixels, so that's a 4K screen. Printing speed 60 millimeters an hour. Materials of course is a 405 nanometer UV resin, which is exactly what the Monocure resin is. Connectivity, USB and Wi-Fi. The frame is 270 by 290 by 470. The weight is 10.7 kilos. This is an 8.9 inch display and it transcribes to a build area of 192 by 120 millimeters. In comparison to the Photon Mono, it's 4.5 times the volume and 3.5 times the print area of the Photon S. If you have a look at the size of this build plate, down here I've got one from a Elegoo Mars, and you can straight away just see the difference in the build volume in it. It's probably not quite 4 times bigger, but if you were obviously wanting to print a lot of things, you know, multiple things at once, you're going to get a lot more on this than you are on this. Downstairs, I know John's been printing much larger objects on the larger, you know, these 8.9-inch LCD screens, and it's been pretty incredible, to be honest, and the print quality is amazing. The 4K screens are fantastic, and really looking forward to getting this one downstairs to John and seeing how he gets on with it. So I know he's been hanging out to try this, so let's go downstairs and see how he gets on with it.
Thanks, Charlie. I've been lucky enough to have this printer for the last couple of weeks. I've enjoyed printing quite a lot of models on this, and I've learnt a lot about the positives and the negatives. Not a lot of negatives, but as far as 8.9-inch printers are concerned, I think this is my favourite for now. So let's get into having a look at some of the features of this printer. The vat, it's like any other vat, but one feature that I really enjoy on models like this is the ability to pre-tension the FEP using a couple of plates on the side here. So normal vats have a single plate. You put the FEP sheet on there, punch the holes through, and then put the screws through, and there's a single plate that tensions it down. The difference with this is that, and it's the same with the Mars, you've got two plates that you go and wedge or sandwich the FEP sheet in between, tighten down the screws, and then you carry it over to the bottom of the vat, and then you can tighten that down using the other side screws here that you see here, which are M4s by the looks of that. That allows me to get a really good tight FEP on the printer here. In this case, I'm actually using a 200 micron, and you can actually see that I have been using it quite a bit in the last couple of weeks. It's starting to look a bit worse for wear. It's actually got a thin smear of PTFE on there at the moment, just to give it a bit more longevity. When we first got this printer a couple of weeks ago, it had a film with a sticker on it that suggested that we could peel it off, and it was just a protective film. In hindsight, I'm thinking probably you could leave it on there just to protect the polarizer that's on here. And you can actually see the polarizer film on the monochrome screen here actually is lifting up a little bit on the left-hand side there. So it's just stuck down on the surface of the LCD screen. Without the polarizer, the LCD screen will not work. But I believe from reading online, you can actually replace the polarizer film if it does get damaged. And it will get damaged if you have any ruptures in the FEP and it leaks resin on the surface. You've got to be very careful removing the resin. I believe other people have been using spare FEP sheets and actually sticking them down with a bit of Kapton tape around the edge. It also came with a USB stick. It's not a high quality USB flash drive that it comes with, but it does the job. It's fine, and I'm sure you've probably got much better ones already in your collection. This is fairly common of a lot of the build plates on these resin printers. You've got 4 screws that you loosen, and it allows you to adjust the level of the build plate. They've used washers, which is a great thing because when you go and tighten those screws, it has the potential to actually make that metal move a little bit, and it can throw it out of kilt. You're trying to level this build plate. So they've done the right thing and used washers. Now, as you can see, we've gone and put a wham bam on this particular build plate. It certainly saves a lot of headache trying to remove the parts off the plate. The downside was that additional height of the magnet and the plate meant that the leveling left me no room to push it up high enough to be able to level it without it pressing down onto the LCD screen. So what I had to do is, if you have a look down the back here, there's a little metal plate, and that cuts through down here to the optical end stop, and it triggers when it's at home. I've had to bend that plate down just the smallest fraction so that I have enough of a gap underneath the plate here. So you can see I've got probably a couple of mils there of give. So if I were to loosen these screws, the thing would drop down about 5 mil, and then when I went to home it, it would then come back up, and then I'd have just enough room to be able to tighten those screws without it pressing hard against this plate at the top here. So that's one little mod that I had to do to be able to use the wham bam on there. So keep that in mind. If you're going to buy a wham bam system for the Mono X, you'll have to bend that plate down just a fraction so that it interrupts that end stop a little sooner. So it's a very sturdy build plate. Everything's aluminium, and it's got a real quality feel about it. It's got a bit of a slope on it, which is certainly good for helping the resin run off it. And then we have a look at the rest of it. It's all really well built. It's a solid piece of aluminium. It's using dual rails, which is fantastic. There's no give in that at all. As we look down, the lead screw, it's good. It's held at the top with a bearing. That's excellent. We've got the 2 linear bearings all the way down here, so that thing is really rock solid in the Z-axis. And if we have a look at this, this is the Wi-Fi aerial that's built into it. For some strange reason, they've gone and put the Wi-Fi aerial in a recessed hole at the level where you could potentially have a spill with the resin. Now, if you end up with resin in that hole, that's going to be extremely hard to get out of the hole. That probably wasn't a wise decision to have it there. Somewhere out the back sticking up would have been perfect. It looks like you can replace the LCD screen by pulling off the film. There'll probably be a bunch of screws around the edge there. It looks like this plate probably comes out so that you can route the cables in there, but I don't think it would be a massive headache trying to replace the monochrome screen on this one if it was ever broken. But once again, it's a monochrome screen. It will last a lot longer than the regular RGB screens. So let's have a look at the menu system on this. And under info, you can see it's got a built-in Wi-Fi network, and at the moment it's trying to access an access point, and it's failing because we haven't set that up. I did try and set it up, but unfortunately with our particular Wi-Fi that we use here, it wouldn't talk to it. It would, for some strange reason, talk to my personal hotspot on my phone. So probably a bit more exploring on that, and I can work it out. You have to actually create a text file on the USB stick and put it in for it to be able to update the access point that you want to access and put in the particular password. For some other networks, it probably works just fine. And we have a look at the tools option here. You've got the usual exposure option here, which just shows you a box at the top there just to detect if any of the pixels on the LCD screen are not working. I don't know why they've got a separate detection one. It's essentially the same thing. It just exposes a square at the top like that. And then you've got the usual move up and down on the Z-axis here. The only difference with this is that after you've homed it, you can in fact modify where the Z equals 0 position is. You can bump it up and down, say by 0.1 of a millimeter. And I've used that and it actually worked very well. I was able to get a 2mm thick print to actually print exactly 2mm thick. None of the other printers let me do that. This is another good thing, is having the actual screws removable so that they don't flop around, or, you know, on some of the systems the actual screw is just a nut and you unscrew it and the nut falls into the vat. We also have a bottle of plate bond here. This is extremely handy at reducing the exposure time that you would normally use on your base layers. So just say for instance you're running at 60 seconds on your base layers, start using plate bond, you'll probably find you can get down to as close as say 20 seconds, sometimes even 15 seconds, because this stuff works so well. So if you're finding that it's very hard to remove the model off the plate, just try experimenting with lowering that base exposure time and you'll get it to the point where it grabs it just enough to work quite effectively. We do actually have a fine film on that plate at the moment, and that's the other good thing about it. It doesn't necessarily come off the plate when you remove your model. It actually stays, it keeps a film on there, and I've certainly found that a fine film is still on there and it keeps working again and again after model after model. All right, so back into the menu here. We've also got an interesting settings option in here. And in settings, you can see I can actually adjust the UV power. So if I set it to 50, it's now at 50%. And it will use that power for all the print jobs that go through. Now, in Chitubox, when I select this particular printer, I can't actually select the UV power. It has to be done manually on here. The print time might take longer, but if I'm, say, printing with crystal clear, where I do not want the resin to go yellow, that's actually excellent. It is also extremely excellent because it allows you to have a bit more longevity in the life of that monochrome screen, because you're not pounding it with a lot of powerful UV light. So the door, this is the door detection option, which I've never used. It means that the print won't start unless I put the cover over the top. So if I turn that on, see how it says a door detection on? It means that the cover itself has got a little sticker on the back there, and it detects when that's in place. Now knows it's in place, so I can actually proceed with printing a print job. So let's proceed with our lovely 1.25 bottle of crystal clear and give it a good minute's shake. So we've given the crystal clear a few minutes just to let the bubbles dissipate, and I guess the next thing we need to do is put some models that are sliced on the USB stick and put it into the printer and get it cracking. In this case, I have two options here. Photon Workshop by Anycubic. It's a reasonable slicer. It works okay, but a lot of people are quite used to using Chitubox. And Chitubox has actually been updated recently to version 1.8.1, and it now supports the Mono X. And then we go into settings, we can see we've got the Anycubic Photon Mono X in here. It shows you the resolution of the screen and the print volume area. And I've already created a profile for crystal clear here, but this profile is based on having the UV power set to 50%. So you can see I've got it set to 2.2 seconds for the regular layers and 20 seconds for the bottom exposure time. And another point I should make about the Mono X is that it by default will apply transitioning on every single print job that you send to it. So there's no transitioning option in here, but it applies a 10-layer transition to every single print job, which is actually extremely handy on larger printers because it will gradually reduce the bottom exposure time, in this case of 20 seconds, down to 2.2 seconds, instead of abruptly going from 20 seconds down to 2.2 seconds between one layer. It actually works much better at keeping those layers secured to each other. And you'll see that I've got the bottom lift speed and the lifting speed and the retract speed set very high. It's called Vroom Vroom if you have a look at that online, and it's being used on a number of printers at the moment to speed up printing, and it does actually work lifting a lot faster. Depending on the model, I'll use anti-aliasing. We would like to print a particular model that I've had a few issues on the satin here. You can see it looks like this. We're going to try and do it in crystal clear. Sitting on the plate there, it's quite a tall model, but I don't need to do any supports on that one. Just have it straight on the build plate, and then I'll slice that. Yeah, that looks good. Now, have a look at this. See how there's only a small section at the bottom of the model that's touching the build plate? Now the reason for that is that the bottom of the model is not actually flat. So where it indicates green, that's where it's actually touching the build plate. And this whole area here is not in fact touching the build plate. So there's a nice feature in Chitubox. If you click on rotate and then click on flatten by face, if I click on that face there, it's going to try and flatten it there, but because the angles are so shallow, it's not actually hitting it. So what I'm going to do to compensate for that is actually drop the model down by a very small margin. I'll do minus 0.1, and you can see there's still a little bit of the edge there that's not touching. I'll drop it down a fraction more and make it 0.2, and there we go. You can see that the entire base is now touching. Now whatever's red is areas that are outside of the build area, but that's okay. It's going to enable that entire bottom section to be attached to the build plate when it starts printing. So I'll click slice again and we'll verify that that's okay. So let's save that to that USB stick, and then we can start printing. So you'll have a look at the files that are on the stick at the moment. You can see the extension is not actually CTB, it's .pwmx. Now the reason for that is that the controller that's on board the Anycubic Mono X is not a Chitubox controller. It has its own proprietary firmware on. And now I'm going to put the USB stick into the printer, and then we go into print, and we have a look down the list of files there, and then we click on print. Now there's some very noisy fans that kick in to keep the whole system cool. And another interesting feature about this interface that they use on here, if we have a look at the settings button during a print job, you can see I've got access to a lot of the parameters for this print job, and I can override them. Now because I've got that special security feature turned on, the print job won't start until I put the cover on. I'm just going to grab the cover now and put it on, and you'll see that the print job will start. There we go. Quick message on there saying the door's closed, and away it goes. So we'll just let that print and we'll see what we get at the end. And we've got a nice clean model. So let's have a closer look and give it a nice clean. There we go. So we'll give it a quick initial rinse off in resin away, wipe off any excess resin. And then we'll stick it into the ultrasonic cleaner. Give it 5 minutes. Give it a nice squirt with some fresh resin away. Essentially, you want to be able to cure it slowly. If you already have a slow curing station that's about 20 watts or less, you can cure it in there, no problems at all, for maybe 15 minutes, 10 minutes. If you do overexpose the resin and it goes a bit yellow, don't be too concerned by that. It will eventually go clear again over about 3 or 4 days, possibly a week. I'm going to leave it on the build plate just so it keeps its shape, and I'm just going to put it in the shade outside. If you want the model to be completely transparent, you will need to spray it with a clear lacquer as well, but wait until it's fully dried and fully cured before you go spraying any additional surfaces onto that model. That's all I have to say down here, Charlie, and we'll throw back to you.
Thanks, John. Insightful and informative as always. Well, there you have it, guys. The Anycubic Mono X, a very solid and popular printer. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, like, comment. It gives us motivation to keep making these. But most importantly, remember to keep on 3D printing.